Senator Lindsey Graham.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you all. It's good to be home where I can understand the guy that introduced me. I'm in Iowa and New Hampshire. I think they've been good introductions, but I can't quite get what they say. Here's what I get about Tim Scott. You could not have a better voice in Washington representing the state of South Carolina than Senator Tim Scott. We've been friends for a long time, but to be respected is the hallmark of any political leader's starting point. If they don't respect you, it doesn't matter. Nobody in the Senate has a bad word to say about Tim Scott. They may disagree with his positions, but nobody has a bad word to say about the man. The respect that comes from a big heart and a big smile, he has earned. He is smart as he can be about things that really matter to the average everyday person. The shootings in Charleston broke our hearts. Having Tim on the floor of the United States Senate talking about it, tears streaming out of his eyes, put a face on South Carolina that I'll never forget for as long as I live. So we've had fun together. He's up for election in 4 years. I keep telling everybody that. He's actually up for election here pretty soon, and I have no doubt how that comes out. He's going to win big because he deserves to win big. As to me, why am I doing this? I really thought long and hard after my primary about doing this. I've been around presidential campaigns with Senator McCain and others, but it's different when it's you. To run for president of the United States is a pretty audacious idea. Until you start meeting other people who want to run, then you can say, hey, maybe I can do this. The bottom line is I think the next president's got their plate full. Don't you agree? So how do you handle a world that's falling apart? You do it from a position of strength, not weakness. We have too many terrorists, too much debt, and too few jobs. And I'll talk to you here in a minute about all three. But if I thought there was a way to destroy ISIL without sending more of our soldiers back to Iraq, I would do it. I've been there 35 times in the last decade, Iraq and Afghanistan. I've seen what works and what doesn't. And we're not going to destroy ISIL from the air. And we better destroy those guys pretty quick or they're going to hit us here at home. The next 9/11 is coming from Syria if we don't do something about it. Obama's foreign policy is in free-for-all. Our military's in decline. Our economy's stuck in neutral. Sounds like 1979 all over again, doesn't it? So what would I do? I'd go on the offense. I'd rebuild our military. I would use it smartly. I would send more ground soldiers into Iraq so the Iraqis would have the capacity they don't have to get ISIL in a bad spot inside of Iraq. There's nobody left in Syria to train. Training the Free Syrian Army has been a miserable failure, and it's not going to get better because most of them have been killed. And you're never going to destroy ISIL until you hit them in their headquarters inside of Syria. I would ask the region to form an army. 90% would be them, 10% would be us, so they don't shoot at each other and we actually win. And we'd go in on the ground, we'd destroy the caliphate, pull it up by its roots. We'd hold it until Syria could repair itself, and we'd push Assad out. As to the Iranian nuclear deal, I would cancel it and try to get you a better deal. If a man tells you he's going to... If a man tells you he's going to cut your throat, Tim, don't buy him a knife. This deal's horrible at every level. Finally, we're a nation that's becoming Greece over time. $18 trillion in debt. The real problem is when the baby boomers retire en masse. Anybody here born from 46 to 64? Anybody here born after 1964? Good luck. 80 million of us are going to retire in the next 25 years. We're going to want our Social Security checks and want the Medicare bills paid. We'll be down to 2 workers for every retiree. We're $70 trillion short. of the money we need to pay Medicare and Social Security promises made. If the next president doesn't sit down with Democrats and Republicans to fix this problem, we become Greece. By 2040, all the money you send in taxes goes to pay Medicare, Social Security, and interest on the debt. There'll be no money for the Department of Defense or anything else. What did Ronald Reagan do in 1983? He sat down with Tip O'Neill, a liberal Democrat. Working together, they adjusted the age of retirement from 65 to 67. That saved Social Security for 40 years. Because we all live so much longer, it's time to do it again. So as President of the United States, there's 3 things I'd like to do for you and your family. Destroy radical Islam before they hit us and destroy Israel. Get us in a room like Reagan and O'Neill did, have a drink, if that's what it takes, and put a plan together to get your kids out of debt and become energy independent so you don't have to send $300 billion overseas every year to buy oil from people who hate your guts. If you could do those 3 things, it'd be a hell of a presidency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsey.
Long time no see.
Long time, I'll tell you what. It's interesting. Hopefully I'll see you later on today while we're voting.
Right.
That would be helpful. The way our town hall presentations work is that I ask questions and we're not looking for sound bites. We do want to have an opportunity to hear your answer to a question and not simply a sound bite, so I appreciate you cooperating. The other part of it that's really important as well is that we're not necessarily looking to read the encyclopedia as well. So something in the middle would be helpful. Would you agree? Good. I've had some.
In other words, I'll be doing something today I haven't done since I've run for president, having an intelligent conversation with a decent person. This is why you need these town halls.
Thank you, Lindsey. One of the questions, I was having a conversation earlier with a fellow named Michael Sally, who is here. Michael has 3 kids, and he worries about the debt of our nation. Now, one of the things that Michael asks is, how do we solve the national debt crisis that seems to have been put under the rug as we struggle with other issues?
Okay, during the last debate, I said, would somebody please ask me about the debt? And the answer was no, nobody asked me. How can we not have a discussion about what is a looming crisis for your children and grandchildren? Okay, there's $18 trillion of debt. That means you spend more each year than you take in, and it's all added up to $18 trillion. How do you get that far in debt? By partisanship. Now, we're back at 2008 spending levels on the discretionary side. 71% of the budget is Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and interest on the debt. What drives the debt? It's entitlement growth. As the baby boomers retire, Tim, we're going to come into Medicare and Social Security with a tsunami. By 2040, all the money collected in taxes goes to pay Social Security, Medicare, and interest on the debt. It goes from 71% of federal expenditures to 100%. The difference between what we owe and promises and what we collect is $70 trillion. So how does the President of the United States avoid a financial collapse? How do you avoid destroying the American dream? You do what Reagan and O'Neill did back in the 80s. If you adjusted the age of retirement of Social Security from 67 to 69, and you means test benefits for people in my income level, I make $175,000, maybe go down to $150,000. If you ask people like me to take a smaller amount than promised, to take a smaller cost of living adjustment, and you ask younger people to delay entry into the system for a couple of years, you take pressure off the trust fund to allow the baby boomers to get through, retire in dignity, and eventually get this problem behind us. Medicare is much more of a problem than Social Security. The average person pays in $1 and takes out $3. If you don't reform Medicare, it by itself takes us down to the path of Greece. So what would I do? I would increase Medicare Advantage opportunities for seniors. If you want something outside of traditional Medicare, it will be available to you, creating competition, allowing more money to go into the Medicare system. Allowing you to buy things not covered by traditional Medicare would be a good start. That puts more money into the system. But for somebody in my income level, you pay $104 a month premium for Medicare Part D prescription drugs, about 40% of the actual cost. So what would I do on Medicare? I would harmonize the age of retirement to that of Social Security so that you'd enter Medicare later, not at 65. Younger people would have to work longer. I would ask people at my income level to pay the actual cost of the premium, not have it subsidized. Then over time, Medicare writes itself. It's called Simpson Bowles. What do Republicans have to do? We have to flatten out the tax code, eliminate some deductions that many of us enjoy, take that money to buy down tax rates and to pay down debt. Here's the good news, Tim. There is a way to deal with the unfunded liability associated with the baby boomer retirement, but it's a bipartisan way. It requires us to hold political hands and put the country's interest ahead of the party. In 1983, you had a liberal and a conservative who adjusted the age of retirement, and not one person got beat in 1984 because they did it together. The time has come to bring us together to do this big deal, because if we wait another decade, the problem gets harder and harder and harder to solve. When I was 22, as Tim told you, I'd lost both of my parents. If it weren't for a Social Security survivor benefit check, we would not have made it coming to Darlene. I'm 60, I'm not married, I don't have any kids. I have a 401k plan, a military retirement, and a congressional retirement. I would gladly give up some of my benefits in the future to go to people who need it more than I do. 50% of today's seniors would be in poverty without a Social Security check. Tim's mom, my aunt, are Social Security recipients with a very small retirement income outside of Social Security. You have no idea how generous Tim is to his family. But what about a family without a Tim Scott? So if I get to be President of the United States, we're going to come together in Washington and we're going to dust off Simpson Bowles or something like it. And we're going to do what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did. Work together to get us out of debt that your children can't afford to pay. Save Medicare and Social Security, because these are programs worth saving.
Very good. Just with a little, for clarity's sake, Lindsey, as you talk about the importance of harmonizing the retirement ages with Social Security and Medicare, would you have a phase-in period? So if someone's under the age of, say, 55 or 50, would
Yes.
they just get in through time, or?
Well, near-term retirees have to be protected because, excuse me, if you're in your mid-50s, you've already pretty much worked. Most of your work life is behind you. The bottom line is to give young people notice. It's 66 now. It eventually goes up to 67. The world has not fallen apart to adjust it from 65 to 67. We all live like Strom. I mean, here's the problem. You know, Strom Thurmond had 4 kids after he's 67. Any takers? Okay, Tim, hey, one volunteer. I think Tim might actually could do that. But I don't have faith in a lot of other people. So the bottom line is, where do the workers come from when the baby boomers retire out? That's why you need immigration. But we just don't have enough people to pay in. So near-term retirees would be protected unless you made over $150,000 a year. If you're making $150,000 a year in retirement, I would ask you, even if you're on Social Security, to have a smaller COLA, simply because I think you could afford it, and that would shift some money to people who need it more than you do. But the benefit changes would be perspective. You're not going to change the age on somebody who's inside 55. You're going to give younger people decades to prepare for the additional time period they'll have to work before they go into Medicare and Social Security. Now, here's the question. Now, shut up. If we're not willing to make some sacrifice, how do we fix this? If some of us are not willing to fight the terrorists over there, they're coming here. So if I'm going to send a young man and a woman back to Iraq, risking their life and their limb, don't you think I owe it to the rest of us here to get us out of debt? Yes. Don't you think I owe it to the country as a whole to be honest?
Lindsey, as a follow-up question, we have another member of our audience who has a question about the VA, because as you talk about fighting terrorists, we've seen the atrocities of war in the way that we have not seen it visually, because in World War I, World War II, we had many, many deaths, thousands of them, but we didn't see them paraded on TV week in, week out, day in and day out. We are very aware of the absolute challenges that our men and women who serve in uniform from World War II, still, I met a guy yesterday at the VFW, 91 years old. And then we have folks today who are in their 20s who've lost limbs. How do we make sure that the promise of the VA, and the promise this country makes to our men and women while they're in uniform, is honored when they're no longer in uniform?
Great question. So the discretionary budget is about 30% of all federal spending. That includes the Department of Defense, Department of Education, the Veterans Administration. So if you really want to help the veteran or anybody else, Alzheimer's research or the National Institute of Health, we've got to get our long-term debt problems fixed. Does that make sense? Yeah. If you don't fix the long-term debt obligations, there's no money left to help the veteran. So what would I do for the veteran? The VA is a big organization. It's a government monopoly when it comes to health care. There are a lot of good people in the VA. You've got a brother who's a colonel and a sergeant major. So Tim's two brothers are serving in the military. What would I do for veterans? I would give them a card to go anywhere they wanted to go, anytime they wanted to go. And if they picked the VA, that would be their choice, not mine. It would create competition. Those VA centers who serve the veteran well would stay open because the veteran would tell us which ones work. Those that serve the veteran poorly, we would know because nobody would go there anymore. It would cost money, but it's money well worth spending.
Staying on the foreign policy conversation or topic, both Steve Fowler and Sharon Jenkins both have questions about our most pressing national security problem facing our country. And as president, what would be your top national security objective? I'd like to meld these into one question and simply ask, if you were to identify the worst problem from a national security perspective, what is it? And then I'll have a follow-up question based on their topics.
Okay. Well, there's really two components to this. The nightmare from hell is an Iranian nuclear program, because you're going to create a nuclear arms race in the Mideast. The Arabs are not going to accept a nuclear capability in the hands of the Shia Persians. So the number one threat is the marriage of a weapon of mass destruction with a radical Islamic organization that would use it. 3,000 of us died on 9/11 only because they could not find a way to kill more of us. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
So the nightmare that I worry about is a nuclear, chemical, or biological weapon falling in the hands of an organization that would actually use it. The Iranian nuclear deal would be my top priority to set it aside and get you a better one. Because what we've done is we've given the Ayatollah $100 billion of new money without any requirement that he change his behavior. 5 years from now, they can buy more weapons. In 8 years, they can build a missile, ICBM. And in 15, they have a pathway to a bomb, even if they don't cheat. That is a formulation that I think would throw the world into chaos. Why President Obama thinks this is a good deal is beyond me. During the negotiations, the Iranians toppled 4 Arab governments friendly to us. Yemen is a hotbed of terrorism. The Houthis, backed by Yemen, drove out the pro-American government in Yemen, and now we've lost eyes and ears on Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the second most lethal Sunni terrorist organization only to ISIL. Iran, during the negotiations, destabilized the Mideast. They've killed 400 to 500 Americans with copper-tipped IEDs, and we took all that off the table as we negotiated with their nuclear program. So what would I do? I'd get you a better deal. I'd go on the offense when it came to ISIL. I would go from 3,500 troops in Iraq to 10,000, which would give us a capability we don't enjoy today. A couple of Army aviation battalions, American attack helicopters flown by American pilots, special forces to kill ISIL leadership morning, noon, and night. When it comes to the Syria, which is hell on earth, I'd form a regional army of people in the region who are threatened by ISIL like we are. They would pay for this war because we paid for the last two. 90% of the army would be regional forces, 10% would be us. We'd go in on the ground, we'd pull the caliphate up by its roots, and we'd hold the territory. Those two threats have to be dealt with. A bad deal with Iran and a growing threat from ISIL. And finally, Tim, you can't do any of that if you don't rebuild your military. Priority number one is to set aside these defense cuts and rebuild our military.
Two points that were raised during your comments. One was about taking the troop force from 3,500 to 10,000. It appears to me that if you had more of our soldiers there, the 3,500 that are currently there would be safer.
Yeah, you worry about, yes, you do. You actually worry about putting these guys and gals in a train it buys assist arena where they can get overwhelmed. Force protection is very important. What have I learned in Iraq? That after Saddam fell, we made mistakes. We didn't appreciate what would happen if we took the Iraqi army apart. I blame myself too. I didn't appreciate it. Bush finally adjusted, the surge did work. So from 3,500 to 10,000 is enormous additional capacity. It makes those who are in the fight safer because they have more Americans watching them. And it gives you a capacity against ISIL we don't enjoy today. The surge did work. To those who served in Iraq, you did your job. In 2010, President Obama said Iraq is now secure, democratic, and on its way to successful transition. Withdrawing all the forces in 2011 against sound military advice allowed al-Qaeda in Iraq to become ISIL over time. Not helping the Free Syrian Army 3 years ago when it would have mattered allows Syria to fall apart. What you have today is one battle space. You have to look at Iraq and Syria as one battle space. ISIL is a direct result of poor decisions by President Obama in Iraq and eventually Syria. And if you don't get a ground component organized, you will never destroy these guys from the air. 2,000 foreign fighters a month go to the jihad in Syria with Western passports. My biggest fear is that some of them are coming here. The longer it goes on over there, the stronger they are over there, the more likely we are to get here. I'll end with this one thought. Al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIL, was in Camp Bucca, an American military prison where I did my reserve duty for 4 years. When we turned him over to the Iraqis, he told the colonel who turned him over, "I'll see you in New York." On that cheery note, we're going to go after these bastards, and we're going to kill every one of them we can find.
I think y'all knew what he meant, right? So George Marshall has a question about, as president, how would you address the growing entitlement class? And I don't think he's talking about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
Right.
I do believe that there has been an explosion
Food stamps.
in entitlement spending.
Right.
How would you address that?
Okay, number one, all of us here want to help people who need help. Most of us are one car wreck away from needing somebody's help. I promise you, if it weren't for college loans, my sister would not have gone to college. If it wasn't for Social Security Survivor Benefit Check, we'd had a hard time making it. The goal is to have a helpful government that your children can afford, right? The goal is to have a food stamp program that helps people when they're down and out. We've increased food stamp spending by an ungodly amount. It is full of fraud. So what would I do? I would sit down and make these programs sustainable. You can't save America without dealing with Medicare and Social Security restructuring. These two programs alone, plus interest on the debt, take all the life out of the economy and all the money you send in taxes. But when you look at reforming the food stamp program, how about this idea? If you're a mother with 2 kids, don't choose between working and government programs. Do both. Right now, there are a lot of women in South Carolina struggling, single moms who can't go to work at a Burger King or a McDonald's because the income they generate reduces the benefits she needs to help raise her children. What would you do? You know, you got to make about $15 an hour in the private sector to replace some of these benefits. So the incentive not to work is there. What would I do, Tim? I'd sit down with you and others who have really got a heart for this and try to design entitlement programs that help the young single mother in two ways. Put food on the table, health care for their children, but at the same time allow them to get into the workforce so over time they can become self-reliant. Finally, about Medicaid. Medicaid is a program for people who are in the low to moderate income level, sponsored by the government. If I were president, I would eliminate Medicaid as we know it. I would change the fee-for-service model. Right now, people on Medicaid go to the emergency room when they have a headache because there's no downside to going. Here's what I would do. I would let everybody on Medicaid buy a policy in the private sector. I'd create competition for the Medicaid patient, have healthcare companies competing for the Medicaid population. We would pay their premiums, but they'd be in healthcare networks where they would be sharing in the outcomes too. If you smoked, you would pay more. If you went to the emergency room too much, you'd have a copay. We got to change this idea that it's always free. People need to be attached to their behavior. If you smoke, you should pay more when it comes to health care.
Susan Colvin of Myrtle Beach has a question about abortion. A, your position, and B, perhaps if you could flesh out a little bit the whole issue around the pain-capable legislation that you sponsored that did not make its way through the Senate.
Okay, I'm pro-life. We all started as zygotes. This is the one thing that me and Obama have in common. The birthing process is the same for all of us. Here's the question. It's 2015. We're one of 7 nations in the entire world that allow abortion on demand at the 20 weeks, 5th month of pregnancy. There's 7 other nations. Tim and I have been trying to get out of this club. I have legislation sponsored by Tim Scott that would take off the table abortion on demand at 20 weeks. There are children who have actually been born at 20 weeks who are healthy today. But the theory of the case is a bit different. Under Roe v. Wade, it says once the child is viable medically, the government can protect the unborn. Look how science has changed from 1973 to now. As a pro-life senator, I want to challenge the system at every turn smartly. I don't want to run somebody down who's pro-choice. I want to try to enlighten them as to why I'm pro-life. What good comes from aborting a baby at 20 weeks? Does that make us a better nation? Don't you think that's a practice that America needs to get away from, being a humane, decent group of people? We got 54 votes. I promise you, as long as I'm in government, we will pursue this until we get to where we need to go. 60% of the American people are with us. To my friends on the other side, what good comes from an abortion this late in the process if you have an exception for the life of the mother, rape, and incest? All I can say is that we're going to win on this issue. America's becoming more pro-life, Tim. Voices like yours, speaking in a unique way, allow us to make a case for the unborn that couldn't be made otherwise. The best case for the unborn comes from somebody with a smile on their face and love in their heart. When do you become you? When do you have a soul if you believe you have one? If this is not worth debating and talking about, what is in a democracy? So those who say we shouldn't be talking about this, what more important thing to talk about than when you become you and when life starts and when it ends? So I'm pro-life with an exception for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I have been behind every pro-life movement for the last 20 years in terms of legislation. It took us 12 years to get the partial birth abortion ban through the Senate, the House, on the President's desk, through the Supreme Court, I'll make a prediction. Our pain-capable bill, we're going to do it less than 12 years. And here's why we are banning abortions at 20 weeks. Not because the baby is viable, even though we know some have lived. It's because at 20 weeks, the doctor can't operate on the baby without anesthesia. Medical science has advanced so far that we now know that in the 5th month, the baby feels excruciating pain. So that's why you have to provide anesthesia to save the baby's life. Here's the question. If you have to provide anesthesia to save the baby's life because they feel so much pain, is it right to abort that baby by crushing their skull? No. The answer is no.
Good answer. Final point is that North Korea, Vietnam, and China are some of those countries of the 7 that allow for late-term abortions, which I think is important to know the company that we keep. Another question from Cheryl in the audience: how do we restore confidence in our domestic economy as the government seems to be taking over more and more aspects of the economy?
Oh, like somebody who has run a lemonade stand. You know, how many of you bought a car? Well, you could have done a better job with the Iranian deal than John Kerry, because he's never bought a car. Barack Obama has hired people to run the government that have never run a business. Elect a president who understands the economy. First thing I'd do is fire everybody Obama's appointed. I'd pick somebody. I'd make Tim Scott head of the Department of Commerce. Tim's run a business. Trey Gowdy'd be a hell of an attorney general. There's a lot of talent here. Nikki Haley, hell, we could just do the whole damn government right here in South Carolina. The bottom line is, there's a blanket over the economy's growth. It's created by excessive regulation, taxation that's uncertain and too much. And let me give you one example of why it's hard to create a job in this country. Obamacare. It's not about the 30 million uninsured. It's about taking over health care at the federal level for everybody. It's a backdoor attempt to do what they couldn't do through the front door, single-payer health care. The goal is to get employers to drop coverage in the private sector to put people in exchanges run by the federal government, a de facto single-payer system. Now, if you got 48 people in your workforce, would you hire 3 more? No, because you'd be covered by Obamacare. If you work 30 hours a week, your employee's not covered. If they work 40, they are. Those 2 things about Obamacare hurt this part of South Carolina. You're a service economy. If you have a $15 an hour minimum wage, there are going to be kids and seniors lose their job here for seasonal work. So how do you unleash the economy? You got to borrow money. The first thing I would do is fix Dodd-Frank. Most of us borrow money to buy a car, build a house, or start your own business. The EPA regulation on carbon is a nightmare for manufacturing. Why did Boeing and Volvo and BMW and all these companies come to South Carolina? Because we'll educate your workforce for you. We have good technical schools, pro-business government at every level, and no unions. We make things happen. What Obama has done is built a government that makes it hard to make things happen. If you elect Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, or Bernie Sanders, are you going to get change? Are you going to defund Planned Parenthood? No. Are you going to repeal, replace Obamacare? Are you going to build the Keystone Pipeline? If you elect one of us, most likely you'll get a different outcome. Now, how do you elect one of us? We got to get more votes than they do. Think about that.
I'm going to ponder that for a minute. Let's stay on the domestic economy for a little bit here. We certainly have a couple of questions that all are very similar in nature. Tony Denny from Lexington, who I see somewhere in the audience back there, has a question about, if you support lifting the ban on crude oil exports, how will this strengthen our national security, and how does it improve our economy?
Okay, number one, I would support lifting the ban on exports that came in the 1970s. At the end of the day, we live in a world economy where oil prices are set by supply. The more we can generate into the world economy that comes from friendly sources, the better the world is. Does that make sense? What would the world be like if you didn't send $300 billion a year to buy Mideast crude oil? It would be a lot safer. What would the world be like if you could export natural gas from America to Europe and cut Putin's legs out from under him? So what I would do is export crude oil. The refineries don't like it, but I think now's the time to increase world supply coming from friendly nations, and we're friendly people. Why would I build the XM pipeline? I've been to Canada twice with Tom Rice, who does a wonderful job for you, by the way. Tom is a great congressman who tries to solve problems. We went to the oil sands in Canada, looked at it ourselves. They're going to sell the oil to China or us. They're going to sell it to somebody. Hadn't you rather buy oil from Canada? It's like buying oil from your cousin. Building the pipeline is a good thing. It creates jobs. So to Tony's question, I would export oil because we're now becoming an export nation to increase oil supplies in the world to counter what Iran's about to do and to counter the effect that the OPEC nations have on the world marketplace.
Excellent. Well, Lindsey, we have about 5 minutes left.
That went quick.
It was pretty quick. As long as your watch is right, we have about 5 minutes, right, left? About 12:25? About 12:20? 12:20? 12:23, thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left. So 2 quick questions, and then I'll give you the final question.
Okay.
Joe DeGallier from Myrtle Beach wants to know what President Graham would do about sanctuary cities and perhaps a broader conversation about immigration.
I would eliminate the need for sanctuary cities because illegal immigrants would be deported in a fashion that would prevent them from coming back in the future. We got 11 million illegal immigrants in this country today. We got 2 borders, one with Mexico, one with Canada, right? The Canadians come to Myrtle Beach in March and they go swimming and they go home. We're glad to have them because it's too cold for us to go swimming. If you don't secure your border, Joe, they'll keep coming forever. When Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to 3 million, he didn't follow up. Double the Border Patrol, triple the drones, shut down your southern border the best you can, deal with the visa overstays. 40% of illegal immigrants overstay their visa. When your overstay period hits, every cop in the nation knows you are here illegally. They can round you up and send you back. Illegal immigration is an economic problem. We've got to stop hiring illegals once you give people a chance to know who's legal and who's not through National E-Verify. Take people's businesses away from them, put them in jail, right? Make it hard to hire an illegal immigrant in the future. As to the 11 million, deport felons, those who've been constantly involved with illegal behavior, they can't stay because we don't want them. As to the rest, here's the deal. Raise your hand. You get biometrically identified. You start paying taxes and get to meet the IRS like the rest of us. You'll pay a fine of $2,500 to help secure our border. You'll have to pass an English proficiency exam to stay here because if you don't learn English, you're not going to be productive. You can't apply for a green card for a decade because that's the punishment of violating our border security laws. And I'll try to create a situation, Joe, where we won't have 11 million 20 years from now. My goal is to fix this once and for all in a practical fashion, get this issue behind us. I'll end on this. If we're down to 2 workers for every retiree, we better have a legal immigration system where we can choose people from all over the world, not just Mexico, to help our economy. So when a kid graduates from Clemson from India that has a degree that we need, don't send them back to India, let them stay here and work with us if they want to. We're going to need to increase legal immigration as the baby boomers die out. Strom had 4 kids after he's 67. Other than Tim, nobody seems willing to do that. So we better have a legal immigration system to help our economy in the future.
I may have been joking. One final question before the wrap-up question. I always end with the same basic question.
Okay.
But the question before that question, when you look at the Syrian situation, it's hard to deny that a part of the challenge that we see in Syria is these false red lines that's been drawn by the president of this country. And the fact of the matter is that when you look at the Syrian refugee crisis, I think it goes back to that red line.
Yes.
When you look at the atrocities within Syria, I'm not sure that we could blame ourselves for that, but we certainly seem to be a co-conspirator with not dealing with Assad at the beginning. So the real question is a Syrian refugee question, but I think you have to drill into the Syrian situation to really answer, what do we do about the refugees?
Okay. Well, one, you stop the reason they have to leave their own country. They don't want to come here. They don't want to go to Europe. They're having to. The Christian religion is being destroyed in 2015. Do you get that in the Mideast? Genocide. Our president's not doing a damn thing about it. So number one, what would I do with Syria? I would get to the heart of the problem. There's two problems in Syria. The average Syrian doesn't want to live under the ISIL banner, and that's good news for you. The average Syrian or Iraqi is not a radical extremist. Their country's been overwhelmed by mistakes we've made and they've made themselves. So what would I do? I would go in on the ground and destroy ISIL before we get hit here. I'm not so much worried about the refugee problem leading to a 9/11 than I am jihadists who are already probably here. So if you think it's bad today, do nothing. The king of Jordan is hanging by a thread. 630,000 Syrian refugees. If we let this war go on much longer, Tim, Lebanon and Jordan could be a victim of Syria. The entire Mideast could collapse, and Israel will be surrounded by a bunch of radical groups. Islam in the hands of ISIL is the most lethal force since Hitler. Radical Islam and Islam are different in this regard. There are plenty of people in the faith that want to kill these guys as much as you do because they don't want to live under their banner. We need to help them. We need to train their armies, their police forces, give them the capacity to fight back. We need to educate young women to have a voice about their children. That's the ultimate destruction of radical Islam. It takes a long time, but the outcome does matter to us. So as to refugees, I want to stop the reason they leave. You've got to destroy ISIL, and Assad is the magnet to all of this. He's an Alawite controlled by Iran, and people in the region are not going to accept him as a legitimate leader. He's massacred 250,000 people in Syria. They won't accept him as the leader of Syria. What Russia's doing is undermining us, means this war will never end. Do you think Russia would be in the Ukraine today if Ronald Reagan were president? No. Do you think Ronald Reagan would have had a hard time getting hostages out of Iran? You give me $100 billion, I can get anybody out of jail. If you want a new foreign policy, you need to elect somebody who will do something differently. I'm going to do something differently if I get to be commander-in-chief. We're going on the offense. Instead of worrying about refugees, they're going to be worried about us. They're going to be worried about a coalition army that's going to come in on the ground and destroy these guys where they live at the heart of the problem, which is in Raqqa, Syria. So, Tim, the refugees have to be dealt with by the world in a responsible fashion. Not one person comes here unless they're vetted. But I'm not worried about taking in refugees as much as I am destroying the reason they're coming. Another 9/11 is on its way. We're living on borrowed time. Hit them or they're going to hit you. I intend to hit them.
All right. Senator Graham, thank you for participating in this town hall. Certainly the last voice you'll hear at the end of this town hall will be Lindsey Graham's as he answers this question. Let me say to the audience, thank you for participating. Your questions are the reasons why I enjoy being on the stage, having an opportunity to ask your questions and make sure that we get thorough answers to the question. This question is my question to you, Senator Graham. I believe, as my good friend, Congressman Trey Gotti has said several times, that we have won one out of the last 6 popular elections. How do you bring the country together with an aspirational message about the future of this nation?
Okay, if you're an African-American family, Hispanic family, how has the last 6.5 years been for you? The biggest loser in the Obama economy has been young African-American and Hispanic males. The American dream used to be owning your own home, now it's getting your kids out of your house. I've never been more excited about America's opportunities than I am today. God has blessed us with an abundance of natural resources, oil and gas. We need to go after it in an environmentally sound way, create a growing economy, and become energy independent. That will create jobs for young people. But I guess what I would tell Hispanics particularly, we went from 44%, Tim, to 27% in the last 8 years. Judge me by what I've tried to do on immigration. My family was broken apart by illness. I've resisted the temptation to destroy your family because of political gain that may come my way. Look at the Republican Party. Look at Tim Scott. Look at Nikki Haley. Look at Lindsey Graham. Look at Kelly Ayotte. This is a party with young, bright, energetic people who are dying to do good. And they believe the best hope for you and your family is a strong national defense and a growing economy, not more government. All of us believe that there's a time and place for the government. Our friends on the other side seem to have no limits on what they want to do when it comes to growing the government. I will end on this. If you're a waitress and you'd like to make more money, I understand what it's like to work in a restaurant because my family owned one. Here's what I want to do for you as your president. Create an environment where you can borrow money and open up your own restaurant if you want to. Or somebody will open up a new restaurant in town to pay you more and hire you away because your employer is going to have a problem on their hands. If they don't pay you more, you're going to leave. Hillary Clinton wants to give you more through the government. When Boeing came to South Carolina, everybody in South Carolina in the Charleston area started to pay more in wages so they would lose their employees to Boeing. What have I learned in 60 years? I've learned that we're all one car wreck away from needing somebody's help, that life is very fragile, but the best way to help people is to give them a good job. And the best way to grow the economy is to deregulate it, have lower taxes, and allow people to borrow money so they can take the risk of creating new jobs. To the middle class, what the Democrats offer you is more government that your kids can't afford to pay for. What Tim and I offer you is a chance to live your dream out, have a sustainable government that doesn't make us a socialist nation. So the choice of the middle class is what this is about. This is what we're all trying to do, is convince you that we're the best hope for you and your family. The middle class is somebody who doesn't go on vacation when the car breaks down. And if the kid gets sick, you have to change your entire budget. You make too much to be on government programs, but yet you still live paycheck to paycheck. Put me in that arena with her, Tim, or Joe Biden, and for God's sakes, Bernie Sanders. If Hillary makes it through this process, here's what I would ask her. Your definition of flat broke and mine are a bit different. If after 8 years in the White House, your husband being president of the United States, you thought you were flat broke, you have lost your way. Tim and I can show you flat broke. We've got a chance to win this election. There's no Hispanic group I can't go to in this country and hold my head up high and say, join our team. You're welcome. And I would take Tim Scott with me all over this country, starting in Baltimore, and say, listen, a bad school and no place to work gives you the same result forever. We're going to give you a better school and try to create a job for you. I think the Republican Party has a hell of a story to tell. I think the Democratic Party has missed an opportunity in the last 6.5, soon to be 8 years, to change America in a positive way. I really, honest to God, believe I can win this election if I'm our nominee, simply because I've walked in the shoes of the average American more than they have. I think I understand the country better than they do. And I do know this: nobody is ready to be Commander-in-Chief more than I am. Thank you.